Hi there, my name's Evelyn May Whitaker. I'm 81 years old, and these days I live just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, in a little white house with a garden I've kept going since I retired. I wasn't always from here. I grew up in Athens, Georgia, back when the streets were red clay and folks still left their doors unlocked, though I never felt safe, not even once. I'll get to that in a minute. I worked most of my life as a school librarian, and when I wasn't helping kids find books, I was usually cooking, raising my family, or writing in notebooks I never showed anybody. These days, I volunteer at a shelter twice a week, teach kids how to write their own stories, and I bake way too many cookies, which I give away like some kind of southern grandma fairy godmother. But today, I'm not here to give you banana bread recipes. I'm here to tell you the truth, my truth, because I believe there's somebody out there. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone you love, who needs to hear this. You might be stuck in something, hurt, confused, ashamed. You might think no one would believe you, that it's too late to escape. Or maybe you got out, but you're still carrying it, still waking up with the weight of what they did to you. I know that feeling. I carried it for years, decades really, thinking I was the only one, thinking I had to bury it deep and keep on smiling. But here's what I want you to know, before I say anything else. You are not alone, and it is never too late to take your story back. What I'm about to share isn't easy. It's not soft around the edges, but it's real. And if you're willing to stay with me for a little while, I'll tell you how a scared little girl from a blue-shuttered house in Georgia grew into the woman sitting here now. It's a story about survival, about breaking silence, about turning scars into strength. And maybe, just maybe, it'll help you do the same. So grab a cup of tea if you've got one, take a breath, and let me start from the beginning. I was born in 1944 in a small white house with blue wooden shutters and a creaky front porch. My mama used to paint those shutters every spring, no matter what was going on inside. They were always the brightest thing on the block, even when everything else was falling apart. My earliest memories are not soft. They aren't the kind you hold on to because they make you feel warm. Mine are made of splinters and whispers, of heavy footsteps and held breath. My father, Earl Whitaker, was a carpenter, a hard-working man by day, a different creature by night. He never needed a reason to be angry. Breathing too loud could set him off. So could the wrong dinner, a broken glass, a look he didn't like. It didn't matter. The house smelled like cedarwood, whiskey, and cigarette smoke. A man's house, he'd say. But to me, it always smelled like fear. When I was little, 5, maybe 6, I learned where the quiet spots were, behind the laundry hamper, under the porch, where the ground was cold and smelled like dirt and old leaves, in the hallway closet behind Mama's coats. That's where I hid when the yelling started. That's where I listened to drawers slamming, to belts being ripped from loops, to my mother begging him to stop. Sometimes he did. Most of the time, he didn't. He didn't hit us every day. But he kept us scared every day. And that does something to you. Living in fear turns your body into a tight little knot. You start flinching before anything happens. You read the air like a weather report, trying to predict the next storm. You learn to smile at the neighbors so they don't ask questions. You say thank you when you're told to, and you learn to cry silently with your teeth clenched. I didn't have friends. Not really. I wasn't allowed to play after school. I'd go straight home, help Mama in the kitchen, then disappear into my books or my hiding places until it was safe to come out. He never hit me in the face. That was on purpose. Everything else was fair game. The back, the legs, the arms. One time he hit my hand so hard with a wooden spoon that I couldn't hold a pencil for a week. I told my teacher. I fell off the porch. She nodded, didn't say a word, and handed me a different assignment. I was invisible. So was Mama. More than me even, she took the worst of it. bruises on her collarbone, cracked lips, sometimes limping, always quiet. She made excuses to everyone. He's just tired. It was my fault. You know how men are. But her eyes told the truth. They were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. One night, when I was about 7, I woke up to glass breaking downstairs. I crept out of bed, toes cold on the wooden floor, and looked through the banister. My father was drunk, shouting. Mama had dropped a glass. He grabbed her by the arm and shoved her against the sink. I remember the sound her head made. Not a scream, just a dull thunk, like a watermelon hitting the ground. I ran back to my room, heart pounding so loud I thought it would wake the neighbors. I got under the bed and stayed there until morning. I wet myself in the dark and didn't even notice until I stood up. The next day, Mama wore a scarf even though it was hot outside. She smiled and said she'd burned her neck on the curling iron. Nobody asked anything more. That was life. That was normal for us. The thing about growing up in a house like that is, it gets inside you. You start to believe that love is pain, that silence is safety, that your body belongs to someone else, someone stronger. You learn how to make yourself small. You learn not to cry. I stopped crying when I was 8. I just stopped. But I never stopped watching, never stopped listening. And somewhere inside all that silence, a little voice kept whispering that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than survival. That voice saved me later. But back then, I was just a girl in a yellow nightgown, with bruises under her sleeves and nowhere to go. Just a girl in a house with bright blue shutters and no one coming to help. Sunday was supposed to be the good day. The day we put on clean clothes, sat still on wooden pews, and sang about grace and mercy and forgiveness. Mama would wake me early, braid my hair tight, and pick out a dress. Always something soft, pastel, with a little lace collar. She'd press it the night before and lay it across the end of my bed like a peace offering. "Be on your best behavior," she'd whisper. "Don't give him a reason." I always obeyed on Sundays. Our church was small, whitewashed, with stained glass windows that filtered the sunlight into colors that danced on the floor. The choir was mostly old women who sang slightly off-key, and the pastor, Reverend Myron King, had a voice that boomed like thunder when he preached about hellfire and softened like butter when he talked about redemption. Everyone smiled at each other on Sundays. Everyone smelled like talcum powder, fresh bread, and cologne that clung to suit jackets. We were all on our best behavior, especially me. But even on Sundays, the bruises didn't disappear. I remember one Sunday in particular. I must have been 8. I had a row of red welts across my back from a beating the night before. I'd knocked over a pitcher of tea during dinner, and my father lost his temper. Said I was careless, said I needed to learn to respect what he worked for, said it was time I grew up. He didn't hit Mama that night, just me. Said she spoiled me. The next morning I wore my Sunday best, a pale blue dress with little white buttons down the front. It clung to the skin where the welts still burned. I winced every time I moved, but I smiled like I was supposed to. At church, Miss Hattie, one of the older ladies, patted me on the head and said, "You look so sweet today, Evelyn, like an angel." I said thank you. I always said thank you. The pastor's wife handed me a peppermint from her purse. That was it. No one asked why I sat so straight on the pew like I couldn't lean back. No one wondered why I flinched when someone tapped me on the shoulder. No one noticed the way Mama looked at me. Not with pride, but with something like apology that she never spoke out loud. That day, the sermon was about obedience, how children should honor their mother and father, how discipline was love and God corrects those he loves most. I stared at the floor the whole time. I remember the exact shade of the carpet under the pews. Red, faded, with little bits of thread sticking up from years of wear. I counted the frayed spots over and over again, trying not to cry. I didn't know if God was watching, but if he was, I figured he wasn't doing much about it. After service, my father shook hands with the pastor. He laughed. He told a story about fishing. Mama stood beside him quiet, smiling, holding her purse with both hands like it might float away if she didn't. That afternoon, back at home, I took off my dress in the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The marks were still there, angry and raised. I remember thinking, how can something be wrong if nobody says it is? Maybe this was normal. Maybe everyone had secrets under their Sunday clothes. I didn't know. But I did know one thing. I couldn't tell anyone, not the pastor, not the teacher, not the lady at the corner store who always gave me extra change when I bought bread. Because even if I did, what if they didn't believe me? What if they told him so I learned to keep it in, deep down, swallow it like stones, smile through pain, stand straight, be good? And I prayed silently in the dark. God, please make me invisible when he's angry. God, please let me disappear, just long enough to survive. And he did, in a way, because no one saw me, not really. I was 9 years old the first time I stepped into the public library on Elm Street. It was summertime, sticky and thick. My sandals slapped against the pavement as I walked alone, pretending I had somewhere important to be. I wasn't allowed out of the house unless I said I was going to the corner store. But sometimes I took the long way, just to be away from him for an hour or two, even if it meant skipping dinner. That day, I found myself standing outside a red brick building with green ivy crawling up the side. The windows were tall and dusty. A small wooden sign above the door read, Athens Public Library. I'd passed it 100 times before, but never gone in. I don't know what made me push the door open that day. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the silence inside. Maybe it was the way my chest felt too heavy and I needed a place to put the weight down. The air was cold, cooler than anywhere else I'd ever been. The smell hit me first. Paper, polish, and something flowery I couldn't name. I stood in the doorway for a minute, not sure if I was allowed to be there. Then she appeared. A woman in a gray skirt, with silver hair tied into a bun, looked up from behind the counter. Her glasses were perched halfway down her nose, and she wore a brooch shaped like a butterfly on her collar. She smiled. "Hello there," she said. "First time?" I nodded. She didn't ask who I was or where my parents were. She didn't ask if I had a card or if I needed help. Instead, she stepped around the counter, walked over slowly, and said, "Let's find you something to read." Her name was Miss Ruth Ellington, and from that moment on, the library became my second home. I came back every day that summer. I would walk past the corner store, cross the street like I had a purpose, and slip into that cool, quiet building where nobody yelled, nobody drank, and nobody hit. Miss Ruth never pried, but she watched, carefully. She noticed the way I flinched when the door slammed. She noticed how I wore long sleeves, even when it was hot. She noticed that I read faster than most adults, but never spoke unless spoken to. One afternoon, she sat beside me while I was reading Charlotte's Web for the third time. "You read like someone trying to escape," she said softly. I froze. She didn't say it in a judgmental way. She said it like a person who knew. I didn't answer. I just kept reading. She placed her hand lightly on the table beside mine. Not touching, just near, just enough. "You don't have to talk," she said, "but if you ever want to, I'll listen." That was the first time in my life someone had offered to listen without asking for anything in return. Over the next few weeks, I started telling her small things, that my daddy drank too much, that I liked to write, that I was scared of going home when it got dark, that my mama never smiled unless we were in church. She never interrupted. She never reacted with horror or pity. She just nodded and let me talk. One day I brought her something, a small beat-up notebook with a red cover. Inside were my scribbles, short stories, diary entries, lists of things I wanted to do if I ever got out. Some of it was messy, some of it was raw. All of it was mine. I handed it to her without saying a word. She took it in both hands like it was something sacred. "Evelyn," she said, "you are not invisible, and none of this is your fault." I swallowed hard. I'd never heard anyone say that before. Not once. Not even Mama. She flipped through the pages, then closed it and placed her hand over the cover. "This," she said, "is the voice of someone strong, someone brave, someone who deserves better." A tear slid down my cheek, and I wiped it fast before it could fall. Miss Ruth leaned in a little closer. "If you ever want help," she said, "real help, not just kind words, I'll believe you. I'll fight for you." I didn't say anything that day, but I went home feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not safe. Not yet, but maybe, just maybe, no longer alone. The book came on a Thursday afternoon, slid across the polished desk like a secret. Miss Roos didn't say much when she handed it to me, just looked me in the eye and said, "This one might stick with you." The cover was simple, no shiny letters, no big title font, just a name, The Diary of Anne Frank. I took it home, tucked into my school books so Daddy wouldn't see. I read it under the blankets that night with a flashlight I'd taken from the kitchen drawer. The pages were yellowed and soft. The binding creaked when I opened it, like it knew what it carried. I read the whole thing in one night. Then I read it again the next night, and the night after that. I didn't even understand, at 9 years old, what a war truly meant, but I understood what it meant to hide. I understood what it meant to be scared inside your own home. I understood what it meant to watch the world go on like everything was fine while your own world was falling apart. Anne wrote with clarity, with fear, with longing. But what struck me most was her hope, even when there was none. Even when she was hungry, cold, and terrified, she still believed people were good. And it made me wonder, if a girl trapped in an attic could still write her truth, why couldn't I? I started writing again, not just little stories this time. Truth. Ugly, hard, bleeding truth. I wrote about the time Daddy locked Mama in the bathroom for hours because she burned his toast. I wrote about the bruises on my thighs, the times he grabbed my arm too hard, the things he whispered after drinking that I didn't understand yet, but knew were wrong. I filled pages fast, pages that smelled like pencil lead and sweat. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the words made my stomach turn, and then I hid it all. Under the floorboard, just beside the bed, a loose plank Mama never fixed. That red notebook became my second heart, beating quietly under my bed, holding everything I couldn't say out loud. One afternoon at the library, Miss Ruth asked how I liked the book. I looked at her for a long moment, then I whispered, "I think I'm Anne." She didn't say, "No, you're not." She didn't say, "Don't be dramatic." She just nodded and said, "I know." That same day I told her I'd been writing things down, the real things. I didn't show her, not yet, but I told her where the notebook was in case something happened. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You are very brave, Evelyn. You don't even know how brave yet." And then she added something I never forgot. Some stories break the silence, others break the system. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I felt it. That book, that simple, honest, terrifying book, broke something in me. Not in a bad way. It broke the lie I'd been told my whole life, that no one would care, that no one would help, that this was just the way things were. It broke the shame. It broke the quiet. And once something breaks, really breaks, it can't go back to how it was. Something new begins in the cracks. I was 13 the night it happened, old enough to understand the danger, young enough to believe I might not survive it. It was August. Georgia heat thick in the air like syrup. The kind of night where everything feels too close. The air, the dark, the fear. Daddy had been gone for 2 days, off on one of his drinking binges. Those stretches were both a relief and a countdown. We never knew when he'd come back, but we always knew how he would come back. Worse. I remember the clock in the hallway chiming 10 when I heard the truck. Its engine roared like thunder down the gravel drive, headlights sweeping across the living room window. I froze on the couch. Mama turned off the TV without a word and stood up slowly like her bones already knew what was coming. The door slammed open. He stumbled in, eyes glassy, shirt untucked, fists already clenched. "Where the hell is dinner?" he barked. "We didn't know when you were coming," Mama said gently, like someone approaching a wild dog. "That's not what I asked." He shoved past her, opened the fridge, slammed it shut. His face flushed red as he turned on her, spit flying. "You lazy bitch! What do you do all day?" And then came the sound I still hear in my dreams, the sound of flesh against flesh. The smack of his palm across her cheek, the stumble of her body against the counter, the breath that rushed out of her lungs like the wind got knocked from her soul. I stood up. For the first time in my life, I stood up. "Stop it!" I yelled. My voice cracked in the middle, but it echoed through the kitchen. He turned to me slowly, too slowly. A silence fell that made my stomach twist. "What did you just say?" I said, "Stop. Stop hurting her." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Then something behind his eyes darkened. His lips curled. "You little mouthy thing," he said. "You think you're a woman now?" He took a step forward. I didn't move. "Think you can talk to me like that?" He took another step. Mama got between us. "Don't," she said. "Don't you touch her. Move." "No." He pushed her aside. Not hard, but hard enough that she fell against the table. Then he turned to me. I thought he'd slap me. I thought maybe he'd grab me by the hair or scream or throw something. But he walked past me, out the back door, into the shed. And I knew what that meant. He kept the gun there, a .22 rifle he'd used on squirrels and stray dogs. I'd seen it once, leaned in the corner behind the lawn tools. Mama looked at me, blood on her lip. "Go," she whispered. "Run, Evelyn, now!" But I didn't run. I went to the living room and grabbed the notebook from under the cushion. Not the red one. That one stayed under the floorboard. This was the copy, the one I'd been writing in during the day. I tucked it under my shirt. I heard the shed door creak open, then the back door. He came in holding the rifle like it was part of his body. Mama stood between us again, shaking but steady. "You shoot her," she said. "You'll have to shoot me first." She didn't scream, she didn't beg. She stood like a wall. He looked between us, his daughter and his wife, one bleeding, one trembling. He raised the gun, and then he didn't. He lowered it slowly, then turned, then left, just like that. He slammed the door so hard the frame cracked. We didn't sleep that night. We didn't speak either. I sat at the kitchen table watching the sky go from black to purple. Mama cleaned the blood from her lip and made tea she didn't drink. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of something bigger, a decision. The next morning, while Mama was still in bed, I wrapped the notebook in a dish towel, snuck out the door, and walked the whole way to the library. 6 miles in the August heat. My feet bled in my shoes. I didn't care. When I got there, Miss Ruth looked up from her desk. I held out the notebook. "I'm ready," I said. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She just took the notebook, opened the drawer in her desk and said, "I'm calling someone I trust." And just like that, for the first time in my life, someone did something. For me. Not because they had to, not because it was easy, but because it was right. I don't remember the walk home. All I remember is the weight of the air finally starting to lift, and the feeling in my chest that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of the end. Miss Ruth didn't waste time. After I handed her the notebook, she opened it, read a few pages, then slid it gently back into the desk drawer like it was something fragile. She locked it with a tiny silver key and picked up the telephone. She didn't look nervous. She didn't ask me to wait. She just said, "I'm calling my cousin. He works with Child Protective Services. He's a good man. He'll listen." Then she looked right at me. "And we're going to do this carefully. We're going to do this right. No more hiding, Evelyn." I sat in the chair across from her desk, my hands curled in my lap. I was shaking, but something in me had shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was readiness. Tiredness, too. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones after years of pretending everything's fine. Within 2 hours, 2 people came to the library. One was a tall black man in a brown corduroy blazer. His name was Deputy Ellis Mason. Miss Ruth hugged him tight and called him L. The other was a woman with a clipboard and a kind voice. Her name was Lenore Wells, and she smelled like peppermint and lotion. She knelt beside my chair, so we were at eye level and didn't ask me to smile. "Can you tell me your full name?" she asked. I nodded. "Evelyn May Whitaker." "And how old are you?" 13. "And this notebook," she said softly. "This is yours?" "Yes." "Did you write everything in it yourself?" I nodded again. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't make me read it out loud. She said, "We're going to take good care of this, and we're going to take care of you." That was the first time in my life I felt like maybe someone really meant it. Deputy Mason stood with his hands behind his back like a soldier. When Lenore finished, he looked at me and said, "I'm going to read every word in that notebook, Evelyn, and I'm going to make sure your father never lays another finger on you. Do you understand?" I believed him, not because he was loud, but because he was steady. They asked if I could go home without raising suspicion, just for a few days, while they gathered evidence, pictures, records, statements. They didn't want to alert him too soon. I agreed. I had been pretending my whole life. What were a few more days? But it wasn't easy. I went home that night and sat through dinner like nothing had changed. My father didn't speak much, just grunted between bites of meatloaf. Mama's hands trembled when she poured the tea. There was a storm that night. Thunder cracked like gunfire. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what day would be the day. 3 days later, it came. A knock on the door just after sunrise. I was still in bed when I heard it, hard, deliberate, not friendly. Mama opened the door, and then I heard boots on the floor. Voices, low, firm, legal. My bedroom door opened. It was Deputy Mason. He looked at me with something like kindness and said, "Come on, Evelyn, it's time." I got dressed in silence. Jeans, a clean t-shirt, my notebook tucked into my bag. When I stepped into the living room, my father was handcuffed and red-faced, sitting on the couch like he still couldn't believe it. "You lying little bitch," he spat. Deputy Mason stepped in front of me, blocking me from view. "She's not the one who's going to jail," he said. They took him out. He fought, but not much. The sheriff's car drove off, red lights flashing but no siren. And just like that, it was over. No one clapped, no one celebrated. But inside me, a door that had been locked my whole life creaked open. Mama didn't say much. She just hugged me tight at the threshold. We weren't going to the same place. Not yet. They said they'd find a safe house for her, but first they needed to separate us while everything was sorted. "I love you," she said into my hair. I believed her, but I also knew she couldn't save me. Not really, not back then. That had to be me. They drove me 2 towns over to a shelter run by a retired nurse and her wife. The place was clean, small, with a porch full of wind chimes and quilts on the beds. It smelled like bread. That night I lay under a patchwork blanket, staring at a ceiling that didn't hold any memories. No yelling, no slamming doors, no waiting for the next hit, just quiet. For the first time, real quiet. And inside that quiet, a voice rose up. Not the terrified one, not the silent one, the one that said, "You made it through. Now it's time to become who you were always meant to be." By the time I turned 16, I had lived in 3 different towns and 4 different houses. The shelter they sent me to after my father's arrest was only a stopgap, a safe place while the investigation ran its course. I stayed there for almost 4 months, long enough to feel the rhythm of safety, but not long enough to call it home. Mama was moved to a separate women's refuge. They gave her counseling, job training, and a clean break. But the truth is, she was never fully free of him, not in her mind. He'd carved himself into her deep, like a tattoo made of fear. Eventually, the court gave her the choice: take me with her, or let me go into a foster placement that would help me finish school. She chose the second option. She cried when she signed the paper. I didn't. I wasn't angry. Not really. I understood in a way most kids my age didn't. Some people can't carry others when they're still learning to walk themselves. My new home was in Asheville, North Carolina, a blue house on a quiet street lined with maple trees. The people who took me in weren't warm at first, but they were consistent. That mattered more. Their names were Clara and Henry Sanders, both in their 50s, childless and quiet as fog. Clara worked at the post office. Henry had a garden he spoke to like it could hear him. They didn't hug. They didn't ask questions. But they gave me space, and they gave me rules. For the first time, I lived in a house where no one yelled. I didn't trust it at first. I'd flinch when someone dropped a spoon. I kept my bedroom door locked. I hoarded food in a shoebox under my bed for weeks before I realized I didn't need to anymore. Trauma doesn't leave just because the danger's gone. It lingers. It clings. It rewires everything. How you sit, how you breathe, how you hear footsteps. But slowly, I began to unfurl. School helped. I enrolled in 10th grade at the local high school. The principal was a tall woman named Mrs. Kendrick, and when I told her briefly that I was new to town and had come from a difficult home situation, she didn't press. She just looked at me and said, "Let me know what you need." That sentence stuck with me. Most people asked what happened. She asked what I needed. I started getting good grades again. Reading voraciously, writing even more. My English teacher, Mr. Abrams, was the second adult in my life who saw me. Not my bruises, not my silence, but me. One day he handed back a short story I'd written and said, "You write like you've seen the inside of a storm." I looked him in the eye for the first time and said, "I have." He didn't ask more. He just nodded and said, "Keep writing." And I did. I kept writing everything down, not just the pain, but the hope, the progress, the things I wanted, the things I feared. I wrote like my life depended on it, and maybe it did. At 16, I got a part-time job at a small diner downtown, pouring coffee and wiping counters. The customers were mostly regulars, tired nurses, lonely truckers, old men playing dominoes. I listened to their stories, laughed when they made jokes, learned to hold conversations again. That job taught me that not everyone was dangerous, that kindness could come without strings, that sometimes people just needed someone to remember their name. I saved every dollar I earned. For college, I said. People thought I was dreaming too big. They didn't say it out loud, but I heard it in their voices. She's been through too much. She'll never make it out of this town. Poor thing. lucky to even be working. But I didn't care. I applied to UNC Chapel Hill in the fall of my senior year. On the night before I mailed in the application, I sat in my room, the one with the small window facing the street, and I read the red notebook one last time. The original one, the one I wrote in at 13, the one I gave to Miss Ruth. She had mailed it back to me after the trial with a short note that said, "This belongs to the girl who survived. Now give it to the woman she's becoming." I cried when I read that, not because I was sad, but because I finally believed her. I didn't believe in love when I left for college, not the kind in books, not the kind people sang about on the radio. I believed in safety, in routine, in keeping your back to the wall and your voice steady. I believed in keeping your heart locked tight behind rib bones and logic, because letting anyone close was just an invitation to bleed. And then I met Marcus Hale. He was tall and quiet, like still water, wore second-hand flannel shirts and scuffed-up boots. He never talked just to fill silence, and he never looked at me like I was fragile or broken, just human. We met at the university library during my first semester at UNC Chapel Hill. He was reading The Grapes of Wrath at one of the back tables, under a window streaked with rain. I sat across from him because it was the only spot with decent light. For the first hour, we didn't say a word. Then he looked up, nodded at the book I was holding, To Kill a Mockingbird, and said, "That one changes people." I nodded back. "So does yours." That was our first conversation. He started leaving notes for me in the spines of books, just little things. "Don't skip chapter 6, it's the best." "This ending made me cry, but don't tell anyone." "You seem like the kind of person who likes old maps. Check page 143. I hadn't smiled like that in years. We became friends slowly. He never pushed, never asked too much. He learned my rhythms, how I needed silence more than noise, how I wasn't ready to be touched without warning, how I sometimes disappeared into my head and needed a minute to come back. The first time I told him about my past, I did it without looking at him. We were sitting on a bench outside the student union, the sun setting behind the trees, campus going quiet. I said, "My father hurt me. A lot. For a long time." He didn't ask what that meant. He didn't press. He just said, "I'm sorry." And then, after a pause, "That wasn't your fault." I cried, ugly cried. Not because I was sad, but because I didn't have to explain it. He believed me without needing the details. I fell in love with him quietly, like a song I'd known in another life. Not a love that swept me off my feet, but one that gave me ground to stand on. We married in 1966 in a courthouse with 3 witnesses and a bouquet I picked from someone's yard on the way. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. We built a life slowly, carefully. A small apartment, 2 used bicycles, and 1 cast iron skillet that cooked everything from scrambled eggs to peach cobbler. When I told him I wanted to become a librarian, he didn't laugh. He said, "That makes perfect sense." He helped me fill out the application, drove me to the interview, waited outside in the car reading a newspaper like it was the most normal thing in the world. When I got the job, I found a note in my lunchbox that read, "Proud of you, I always will be." We had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. I told myself I would never be like my parents. I kept my promises. I never raised my voice in fear. I never let a hand be lifted in that house unless it was to lift someone else up. Parenting brought its own fears. I had to face ghosts I thought were buried. But Marcus never let me face them alone. He stood with me, even when I didn't know how to ask. Some nights I'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, caught in a dream where my father was still in the room. Marcus never tried to fix it. He'd just sit beside me, hold my hand and say, "You're safe, you're here, and you're not alone." He said it so many times it started to become true. Over the years, I kept writing, not just for myself anymore, but for others. I started a writing group for teenage girls at the library. Most of them came quiet and angry. Some had scars you could see. Others had the kind that lived deep behind their eyes. I knew the look, so I gave them paper, pens, and permission. Write whatever you want, I told them. Nobody will read it unless you say so. Some of them wrote stories. Others wrote pain. All of them wrote truth. And I saw what I already knew. When you give someone a voice, you give them back their life. Marcus died on a Thursday morning in November. The air was crisp. He'd just come in from the porch, a mug of black coffee in one hand, the newspaper in the other. He smiled at me like he always did, half grin, half quiet affection, then said, "It smells like snow." And then he collapsed. A heart attack. Sudden, fast. The kind they say is merciful, maybe for him, not for me. We'd been married 35 years. I had learned how to live without fear, how to raise children, how to build a life. But I hadn't learned how to lose someone who loved me right. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't scream the way trauma does. It doesn't bruise the outside. It just empties the room. You still wake up, still eat, still answer the phone. But everything echoes. For a while, I stopped writing. I stopped leading the teen group. I went to the library but couldn't stay. The quiet was too heavy without him in it. It was my daughter, Sarah, who finally pulled me back. She showed up one afternoon, her own baby on her hip, and said, "You gave so much to other people, Mama. You don't have to stop now." She was right, so I went back. At first, it was just the girls' writing group. We met on Wednesdays. I listened more than I spoke. Some of them were angry, some numb, some loud just to keep from crying. But I knew the signs. I knew the stories they weren't saying out loud. One girl, 14, eyes always darting, handed me a story about a bird with a broken wing that kept flying anyway. Another girl wrote poems about monsters with her father's name. I didn't fix them. I didn't offer cliches. I just gave them space to speak. Words spread. I started getting calls from schools, youth shelters, churches. Could I come talk? Could I teach a writing session? Could I just listen? I said yes, again and again. What began as one group turned into many. I called it Project Unseen, for all the girls like me who grew up thinking no one noticed, no one cared, no one would believe them. We sent free notebooks and books to girls in shelters. We created a mailing list. We recorded videos where survivors read their own stories. We printed zines with art and poetry, raw and real. We trained teachers to recognize the signs no one talks about. One of the first girls from the library group, her name was Kiara, grew up to become a social worker. She tells people her healing started with a pen and a notebook with no rules. Another became a teacher, another a lawyer. Some just became themselves, and that was enough. Every story I heard, every voice I helped lift, brought me closer to something I didn't expect, peace. Not the kind where nothing hurts, but the kind where the hurt doesn't own you anymore. I started sharing my own story publicly, not in detail at first, just enough to say, I understand, I've been there and I'm here. Some people didn't like it, said I should be quiet, said the past was the past. But I'd been quiet long enough. When I spoke at a women's prison in 2009, one of the inmates, face hard, arms crossed, came up to me after and whispered, "You're the first person who made me feel like I wasn't born broken." That's when I knew. My survival had never been just for me. It was for her. For the girls still hiding, for the women still bleeding in silence or shame, for the ones who needed someone to stand up and say, "Me too," and still, I rise. I moved back to Georgia last year. Not to Athens, not quite, but close enough that the air smells the same in late spring. That same mixture of honeysuckle, hot pavement, and memory. People ask me why I came back. I tell them the truth. I needed to know that it couldn't hurt me anymore. After Marcus passed and the children had their own homes, I lived in North Carolina for years, working, writing, helping. But something kept tugging at me from behind, a quiet voice saying, "There's one more place you need to stand without fear." So I bought a little house just outside Macon. 2 bedrooms, a porch with creaky steps, and a big oak in the yard that drops leaves like confetti every fall. I planted wildflowers along the fence, set up a small bookshelf by the window, hung a wind chime just like the one at the shelter I once lived in. Every morning, I make a pot of tea. I sit with my journal, I listen to the world breathe, and I remember. Not in a way that paralyzes me, not anymore. I remember the house with the blue shutters, the one where I learned how to be quiet. I drive past it sometimes. It's still there, smaller than I recall. The shutters are white now. The porch is sagging. I don't stop. I don't need to. That house doesn't belong to me anymore. The girl who lived there, she was strong, braver than anyone knew. But she's not stuck there now. She got out. She grew up. She wrote her way into freedom, one word at a time. These days, I still get letters from women, strangers, friends of friends, people who saw one of my talks or found a Project Unseen notebook in a shelter. They say things like, "I didn't think anyone would ever believe me. Your story helped me tell mine. I left because I knew you had once too." Some days I can hardly believe it, that all of it, the pain, the hiding, the notebooks under the floorboard, led here, to this quiet, sunny room, to this life. But it did, and I carry that truth like armor. I am not the things they did to me. I am not the names they called me. I am not what I had to survive to get here. I am Evelyn May Whitaker. I am 81 years old, and I came home whole. If you've made it this far, thank you. Really. Thank you for listening, not just to what I lived through, but to who I became after it. People think the hardest part is surviving the abuse. It's not. The hardest part is convincing yourself, years later, that you're allowed to have a life beyond it, that you deserve peace, that you're more than what they tried to break, and you do. You are. If you're watching this and you're still in it, still living in silence, still walking on eggshells, still flinching when the front door opens, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are not making it up. And you are not alone. I know what it feels like to think no one would believe you. I know what it feels like to protect the very people who are hurting you, just so the world doesn't see the cracks. I know what it feels like to be a child in a grown-up's war, to be a woman who doesn't scream anymore, because what's the point? But I also know this. It doesn't have to end this way. There are people who will believe you. There are people who will help you. There are people who've been exactly where you are and made it through. I don't share my story for pity. I don't share it because it's easy. I share it because someone once shared theirs with me and it saved my life. So I'm passing it on now. And if my voice is the one that makes you feel a little less invisible, even just for 5 minutes, then it was worth everything. We've started a small online group called The Unseen No More. It's quiet. It's safe. It's not for everyone, but if it's for you, you'll know. You don't have to write. You don't have to speak. You just have to show up. Because healing doesn't start with shouting. It starts with being seen. So from my heart to yours, from one survivor to another, you are still here. And that is no small thing. That is everything. Please share this video with someone who needs it. Save it for the day you forget how strong you are. And if no one else has told you lately, I'm proud of you. Just for breathing. Just for staying. Just for hoping. With love, always, Evelyn May Whitaker.